The wind howled outside the small tent, rattling the thin metal frame like it had a mind of its own. The night was cold on the starship Valiant, but inside, there was a warmth that cut through the harshest of winds. The storm was beginning to build outside, but inside the small tent, Nora could almost pretend everything was normal. A tiny purr broke the silence. Nora looked down at the small cluster of white fur in her lap, their tiny eyes wide with innocent curiosity. 4 2- to 3-month-old cat cubs lay nestled in the warmth of her jacket, their fluffy white fur glowing faintly in the dim light of her lantern. Their tiny faces, innocent, pure, with soft round eyes, seemed to melt her heart every time she looked at them. The wind outside intensified. A storm was on its way, but Nora didn't care. She was far from the rest of the crew, out on a remote mission on a planet at the edge of the galaxy. Her only companions were these little cubs she had found, abandoned in the wreckage of a crashed vessel. She couldn't leave them behind. She couldn't ignore them. But she knew what this would mean. As the cubs huddled closer to her warmth, Nora couldn't help but feel an unsettling calm. The Alpha was nearby, and once the Alpha saw the cubs, there would be no stopping it. Nora shifted slightly, adjusting the cubs in her lap. The silence in the tent was profound, and it made her think about the calm before the storm, the kind that was almost always followed by chaos. She hadn't been on the starship Valiant for long, just enough time to understand the ship's layout, the crew's rules, and the unsettling feeling of isolation that accompanied long missions to uncharted planets. This remote sector of the galaxy wasn't particularly dangerous, but the crew had always kept their distance from the local predators, which was why Nora had felt so alone here. And now, here she was, alone with 4 helpless little cubs, tucked into the warmth of her jacket. The thought of abandoning them didn't even cross her mind. She remembered when she found them, the wreckage scattered across the snowy plains, the ship crushed beyond recognition. The cubs were no older than 2 months, covered in snow, their eyes wide with terror. They had been abandoned, left to die in the cold, but she had taken them in. She had no family here, no real connection to the crew, but these cubs, they were hers now. And that was why she was so afraid. When she first heard the growl, she tried to ignore it. But the second growl that rumbled through the air made her heart race. She held the cubs close, her arms tightening around their small, soft bodies. The storm outside was getting worse, the wind carrying a chill that seemed to seep into her bones. Yet she didn't move. She couldn't. The growl came again, louder this time. Nora's fingers trembled as she grabbed the small heat pack in her pocket. She pressed it to her chest, feeling its warmth radiate through her jacket, but it wasn't enough. The cold of fear had settled deep in her bones. It was then that she heard it, the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the ice. Nora's breath hitched, her pulse quickening. The Alpha wasn't just any predator. It was the leader of the pack, a creature whose ferocity had earned it the title of apex predator. She had read about it in the training manuals, but there was no way to truly prepare for something that terrifying. Nora quickly gathered the cubs into her arms, instinctively pulling them close to her chest. Her heart raced, every beat echoing in her ears. The growl had stopped, but she could still feel the presence of the Alpha, like a shadow that stretched across the snowstorm outside. Suddenly, the ground beneath her trembled. The Alpha was close. Too close. Her mind raced. She needed to think. The cubs were a liability, but they were hers to protect. The Alpha wouldn't care about the cubs, it would care about the threat. The cubs would only make it worse. But she couldn't leave them. Her gaze fell upon the cubs, their tiny bodies trembling as they tried to burrow closer to her warmth. They were scared. She could feel it. And it terrified her. In the corner of the tent, she could see the faint outline of the entrance flap fluttering. The wind had kicked up again, and the howling outside drowned out all other noise. But that growl, it was impossible to ignore. Suddenly, there was a loud thump. The flap of the tent billowed inward, and before she could react, a massive shadow loomed in the doorway. The air turned cold. Nora's breath hitched as she recognized the figure standing outside. The Alpha. Nora stood frozen for a moment, her heartbeat a pounding drum in her chest. The cubs instinctively shrank against her, and she could feel their tiny bodies shaking in fear. She held her breath, trying not to make any noise, hoping the Alpha wouldn't notice her. But the Alpha's eyes locked onto her, eyes as black as the deepest void of space. The creature's massive body was still, like a mountain poised to strike. The Alpha growled again, this time louder than before. Her heart clenched. The Alpha was here for the cubs. Nora couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. She stepped forward slowly, her hands still holding the cubs close. The Alpha's growl grew louder, a rumbling sound that vibrated through her chest. Nora's voice broke through the chaos. Stay back. You won't get them. The Alpha's eyes narrowed. The growl intensified. But Nora didn't back down. She couldn't. The cubs, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, let out tiny growls of their own. They weren't afraid anymore. They were ready to fight. And that realization hit Nora like a hammer to the chest. The cubs were ready. But were she? She took one more step forward, knowing what she had to do. The Alpha lunged with a terrifying speed that took Nora by surprise. Its massive jaws snapped, and the wind howled around them, drowning out everything but the deafening roar of the Alpha's attack. But Nora was ready. With a flash of instinct, she stepped sideways, pulling the cubs to safety behind her. The Alpha's jaws missed by inches. It snarled in frustration, its massive body shifting to strike again. But Nora wasn't backing down. Stay back, she shouted, her voice unwavering. She didn't know how, but somehow, she found the strength to stand her ground. She was determined. And so were the cubs. The Alpha seemed to hesitate for a moment, confused by her sudden confidence. It had expected fear. It had expected the prey to cower. But there was no fear in Nora's heart. Just determination. And then, it happened. The Alpha stopped. It stared at her for a long moment, its eyes narrowing in thought. The storm outside seemed to pause, as if waiting for the next move. The cubs, small as they were, stood firm beside her, their tiny bodies tensed, watching the Alpha's every move. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the Alpha backed away. Slowly at first, then with more certainty. It turned and disappeared into the storm, its massive form vanishing into the blizzard. Nora exhaled sharply, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cubs were still close to her, their small bodies trembling. She held them tighter, not sure if it was for their comfort or her own. The storm outside had faded into a dull roar, and Nora could feel her legs shaking with exhaustion. The adrenaline had left her body, but the fear lingered. She had faced down the Alpha, and won. She looked down at the cubs in her arms. They were safe. And so was she. For now. As Nora knelt in the storm, with the cubs nestled against her, she realized something. They had become her family. And nothing, not even the Alpha, would ever take that away. If you want to see more epic HFY stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Survival Arena. Bell. Join the arena, where humans always rise to the challenge.